Welcome to the Limitless Leaders podcast series, brought to you by ASPS, the Aesthetic Society, and the American Hernia Society, with the generous support of Allergan Aesthetics. I'm Nupur Gangopadhyay, a pediatric plastic surgeon and craniofacial surgeon in Chicago, and the Limitless Leaders Chair. Join us for the Limitless Leaders podcast, where we dive into the stories of extraordinary women making a significant impact in our field, breaking gender barriers, and inspiring the next generation of leaders.
You're listening to the Limitless Leaders podcast series, brought to you by the American Society for Plastic Surgeons, the Aesthetic Society, and the American Hernia Society, with the generous support of Allergan Aesthetics. I'm Dr. Donna Tepper, today's special guest host of Limitless Leaders. I'm the division head of plastic and reconstructive surgery at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, Michigan, and have been practicing body contouring plastic surgery for nearly 20 years. It is a privilege to host Dr. Bonnie Koo and Dr. Jordan Frey to discuss financial freedom. Thank you very much to you both. I would arguably say you are two physicians that have dedicated practices to treat physicians with financial dysphoria.
That's funny. I haven't heard that one before.
So I'd like to just take a minute to share with our audience a little bit about you both. Please let me do these a little bit of introduction. So Dr. Bonnie Koo is a retired dermatologist, certified master life coach, and she came to medicine after working in IT department at Morgan Stanley. Her pursuit in medicine began at the Columbia University, and she is founder and editor of Wealthy Mom MD podcast, author of Wealth for Women, Peace, Purpose, and Plenty of Money. She hosts courses and have been featured on a variety of podcasts, teaching financial independence as well as a life of wealthy living. We also have Dr. Jordan Frey, who is a plastic surgeon, specializes in microsurgery, breast cancer reconstruction, and aesthetic plastic surgery. He is a graduate of NYU Integrated Plastic Surgery Program, completed microsurgery at the same institution. He is the Associate Program Director of Plastic Surgery at the University of Buffalo, and is the founder of the Prudent Plastic Surgeon, which is a financial wellness hub that offers insight into personal finance and business. He is inspired by his own debt and shares his journey to financial freedom and strives to help others do the same. His content has been featured on a variety of media outlets, including New York Times, U.S. News, White Coat Investor, Huffington Post, and more. So thank you again for coming, and I'm excited to share the next 50 minutes with you both. You both have a passion for fiscal empowerment, but came to that realization differently. If you could just share that journey to start. Bonnie, do you want to start?
Sure. Just trying to think whether to do the long or the short, but I mean, basically I realized I was going from making a resident salary to an attending salary as I was, interviewing for jobs. And I realized I had no idea what to do with it. And the number was a lot higher than I was making, and just like navigating taxes, what to do with it. And I did have some co-residents who they actually talked about money with some frequency. I just kind of ignored them. And one day I was like, how do you know this stuff? And then they gave me some resources. Actually, the first thing I read was the first White Coat Investor book. And after I read it, I was like, how come no one told me about this? That was back in, 2014. And since then, I've been educating myself and I don't want to go spend too much time, but I then fast forward, I worked with a life coach who basically broke my brain about all sorts of things. And, my philosophy on money has grown and evolved since 2014.
I like it. Jordan, so similarly, you started in debt, disillusioned, and then built yourself out of debt. How did that, share us that story?
Yeah, it started at a similar time frame that Bonnie was describing. So for me, I was at the end of my training, kind of in my fifth and sixth year. And I ultimately realized that I was burned out, which was something that had been going on for a while, but I hadn't really defined it or realized that that's what was happening. And when I kind of got to the root of it, a huge part of that was a lack of financial well-being, which wasn't even really a part of overall well-being that I had considered before. But I was basically at this point where I was near graduating, and everyone was telling me, oh, things are great. You're going to start making all this money. This is what you worked for, etc. And internally, I was just like, no, things aren't all great. Like I have $500,000 of student debt, I have credit card debt, I have no savings, no investments. Yes, my income's going up, but everyone's just telling me about how much money I'm going to need to spend to kind of live this doctor lifestyle. And I don't see a way off of this hamster wheel. And that was making me feel really bitter towards medicine, where I just spent the past, 10 years kind of working under the assumption that once I get to the end of it, everything will magically be all fine. And it just wasn't. And just like Bonnie, I had actively ignored the subject. So at that point, my wife and I just started reading blogs, listening to podcasts, reading books, etc. And it all culminated a few months later with us just writing a very simple kind of financial plan. And what that did was it designed at that point a plan where we could reach financial freedom, or this idea that we could work because we wanted to, not because we had to, in 20 years, which again, before that was a totally foreign concept. Now that's become more compressed if we wanted to, but basically that alone, just having that document did such an amazing job of kind of relieving those symptoms I was having, and getting this monkey off my back. And I honestly did rediscover, my passion for medicine and plastic surgery, and why I got into it for the first place, and all this stuff. And that to me was just a huge epiphany, because again, up until that point, you mostly just sort of hear the taboo in medicine of like, if you're becoming a doctor, if you're a doctor, you shouldn't think about money. And here it was that once I started thinking about money was when I kind of felt like I was becoming a better doctor. So that's sort of where this all started for me.
So I love how you said financial plan and you didn't use the word budget. What do you think about that? Is it that we should just start with a budget, or?
Yeah, I think so. The financial plan, like, is basically, at least as I define it, kind of just a document that says, okay, where you list out your financial goals, kind of like, I want to become debt free in this many years. I want to have a net worth of this in this many years, etc. And then you write out how you're going to do it, in the sense of like, okay, I'm going to save 20% of my gross income. I'm going to invest it this way. I'm going to rebalance my investments every year. Just kind of basic things like that. I'm a big fan of the budget. When I talk to people about it, I that their budget has to be like Nike style, because you just have to do it. I think doctors in general, we aren't always good at spending intentionally. And so a budget, at least in the beginning, helps us kind of map out where our money goes and make sure we're saving enough and investing enough, and that kind of stuff. And so to me, that's kind of like a basic tenet. And then as you kind of go off from that, then you start thinking about, okay, how can I increase my compensation and things like that. But I always say, the basic kind of formula to build wealth is you have to increase and invest the margin between what you make and what you spend. And well, what you make is in your control, at least in the immediate period. It's not as directly in your control as what you spend, which is always, 100% in your control, whatever stage in the game you're at.
So it sounds like a financial plan is more of an algorithm for a future outlook, to look at what your assets are, what your debt is, and find your way out to more of a financial freedom. And then resetting that as your income grows, or your investments grow and your debt decreases.
Yeah, I think the financial plan is a little bit more like zoomed out, and the budget is
Yeah,
kind of a little more zoomed in the, not necessarily day to day, but month to month kind of.
right. Bonnie, what do you do to tell people to begin a budget? Because majority of our listeners are new graduates or early career professionals. Some are mid-career, but I would say the majority probably don't have a budget. Where do you tell people to begin? Because it seems overwhelming to get all those bills out and start an Excel sheet.
Not that I have a different philosophy than Jordan, but the way I like to explain money, and this is just going to add some depth to what he already said, is, money ultimately is a tool, to help you live the life that you want. So it's like, what is that life that you want? I think a lot of us stopped thinking about that once we just entered medicine, because we were on such a prescribed path, right? I want to be a doctor. And then you become a doctor, and then you start working. And a lot of us don't take the time to be like, well, is this how I want to live my life? And I'm not saying like it could be, do I want to practice medicine? Do I like the number of hours I'm working? Do I want a family? And it's something you have to reevaluate with some frequency, like every year. I mean, I look at it a few times a year personally. And then it's like, how much money is that going to take? Like, how much money do I need now in the near future? Near future to me means like, I don't know, a few years, 5 or 10. And then what about the traditional retirement age? I also don't like the word retirement, but the spending plan or budget, it is very, very important because it shows you where you spend your money, and that's an indicator of what your priorities are. And so when you really think about what is, like you say this is important, but you're not spending money or time on it because not everything requires money that you want to do, it shows you what you're prioritizing. And once you do kind of figure out what you want to use your money for, to grow and create assets, then you adjust a spending plan to reach those goals. So I definitely am a fan of apps. I just feel like in this day and age, like who has time for a spreadsheet? That it's a huge waste. It's a huge time suck, although I do have clients who still do. My favorite spending plan program is YNAB, which stands for You Need a Budget. I've been using that since residency. I know Monarch Money is also very popular. It doesn't do budgets the way YNAB does. So I think both, hook up to your banks. And so you can download transactions and look at them. That's going to be the easiest way to look at all of it. I always tell my clients, look at how you've been spending money the last few months to get an idea, because, spending does not always come in nice monthly buckets, right? There are things you pay monthly, but there are things you pay annually, and you kind of have to account for all that. For example, every November, $7,000 comes out of my checking account. That's the premium for my disability insurance. I pay it annually, but I still need to account for it. So I have the $7,000 in my checking account every November.
I like that, and I like the idea. So you're still carrying disability insurance?
I am.
Okay. Is and I guess we could talk a little bit about how long to carry that for, and maybe a little bit of life insurance. Um, your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So insurance is really, it's there to protect you in the case of a financial catastrophe until you can self-insure. Self-insure means you got so much money, it doesn't matter what happens, right? It's hard to put a number. That just really depends on your lifestyle. And so disability insurance is, so I thought it was kind of a scam during residency because these agents would like take us out for free drinks and I would go for the free, for the free food. It still gets me if someone offers free food. I'm like, sure, I'll come. But as I learned more about it, it's protecting your ability to make an income as a physician or any profession, right? It's not just doctors who get disability insurance. And, it makes a lot of sense for surgeons, like you and Jordan, because if something happens and, a motor vehicle accident, which, is pretty common. In fact, this morning, my son's speech therapist texted me that they got T-boned, her whole family, in a car. And you can imagine that can impact your ability to do surgery. Maybe not a total disability, but maybe you can, I don't know how much, give me an example of how many cases you would do in a day.
It varies depending on the length, but anywhere between 2 to 3, a couple times a week.
Yeah. So let's say, you could still do surgery, but you could only do one instead of 2 or 4, right? And that's going to impact your income. So disability insurance can bridge the gap. Total disability is not that common, thankfully. So I think that is really important to have, and it is expensive, more expensive for women because we have it just comes from, actuarial data. And it is, like I said, it is expensive and it's necessary when you're early in your wealth building journey. So my disability insurance, I don't practice medicine anymore, and it is an occupation. And so it will cover what I currently do as a, entrepreneur and coach. I have decided to keep it, even though every November it breaks my heart when $7,000 goes out. And I also know that if I need it, I'll be very grateful that I have it. I have actually interacted with many female physicians who are using it or didn't have it. So it definitely is important. Life insurance is also important if you have people depending on you or will be severely impacted in your passing. And even if, your partner makes a lot of money, you just don't know what's going to happen financially, right? Because people make a lot of money and then something can happen. So, in the beginning, term life insurance is pretty inexpensive. And so it's the cheapest the younger and healthier you are. And so I actually bought $1 million policy before I had a family, just because I knew it would be cheap, and it was the cheapest it would ever be. And then I got my second policy right before I got pregnant. And if I had waited, so both of these things, for women specifically, you want to get it before your first attempted pregnancy. I had gestational diabetes, and my agent told me that my premium would have quadrupled if I had waited. So just to give an example of, get it now. If you know you're going to have a family, just buy a policy. It's pretty inexpensive.
And Jordan, your situation in academic medicine may look a little differently because your institution probably has some sort of life insurance and disability coverage. Do you recommend to those in academic practice to have a secondary policy, or does it just depend on what your institution carries?
Yeah, I think in most cases you're going to want a secondary, like a private kind of life insurance and disability insurance. I have that as well. Most of the institutional ones are generally like not sufficient. You have to look at, okay, what are my expenses every month, that if I couldn't work at all, if I made $0, how much do I need to cover? Um, and it's unlikely that your institution's going to cover you for that. Or like if I died, how much would my partner or kids need? Um, so yeah, I think, in general, you're going to want to look for an outside kind of policy. But yeah, I agree with everything Bonnie said on the subject.
All right, so we've budgeted into or we've added into our spending plan the cost for life insurance and disability insurance. What about the student loans? I think each of you have maybe a little different perspective on when to pay off the student loans. Jordan, what are your thoughts, or how did you do it?
Yeah, I'm still in the process. I can touch on that. I'm very big on like aggressively paying off early. I think ideally within 5 and certainly within 10 years of finishing training that you want to be student debt free. I think that debt is like a huge, both financial, but also mental burden on us. And it does just weigh on us. And so, there's people who will say, well, if I can invest money and get 7% return on the market versus paying off my 5% debts, then mathematically I should invest instead. And I mathematically, you can't argue with that, but you have to realize that paying off your debt, that's the only guaranteed investment that you have. Investing even in index funds in the stock market, which is a very, the way that I invest in the stock market, that's not a guaranteed return. So I'm very big on that. I had about half of my debt that was private, which I just paid off extremely aggressively in the first 3 years and paid that off. I have about half of it, which was federal, a bunch of that paid off, and now I'm in this weird student loan purgatory where I'm one payment away from forgiveness, but everything is all mucked up by the courts and things like that. So I'm in this deferment and have been working on doing a buyback. But every time you can communicate or apply for these things with studentaid.gov, it takes like 6 months for them to get back to you. So I'm in this weird purgatory. But if I don't get forgiveness, then the plan will just be the same: just pay it off super aggressively.
Bonnie, what are your thoughts? Pay it off or invest and play the odds of making more money and then paying off later?
Yeah, so I'm kind of the opposite of what Jordan said. I used to, when I first initially started, and I think our money views evolve over time. I was in that same camp, paying off student loans aggressively. I did have student loans. I did pay them off quickly, but if I could go back, I would not have done that. they were stupidly low interest rates, so it really didn't make sense. It was like 2%. And I cry every time I think about that. I mean, not really, but so I know there's a common, advice like pay off debt aggressively in 5 years. So I actually think the opposite. I think if you're going to be aggressive, and that means putting a lot of, extra money towards debt, that money should go towards creating assets. You will be in a completely different place financially if you actually pour that money. And I'm not even talking the stock market. I think the stock market is it is kind of the slowest way to grow your income. So doctors, I think they're really craving more choices. As you know, doctor burnout and happiness is at an all-time high. And when you have money, you have choices. That's really what it, comes down to. And this is not like a black and white sort of thing. I think I just want people to kind of understand their decisions. I also personally, debt doesn't bother me. And one of the things that I talk about is that, the only thing that will create financial freedom ultimately, and, different definitions of that, is having, multiple streams of income, assets. And the stock market is, probably not going to pay you until you're much older. So again, it really comes down to, how you want to, live your life. And ultimately, paying off debt doesn't make you rich. It does decrease a debt payment, but you don't start getting checks in the mail. It's not an asset. And that's just my philosophy.
I'll add in, I have, I guess, a nuanced approach on that. I do believe that there's a thing like good debt. Like I have over $1 million of debt on my rental real estate properties, but that debt pays me to have it, in the sense that, the checks I get from rent and things like that are way more than that. And so the property's cash flow, etc. But the student debt or my home mortgage or stuff like that is debt that doesn't pay me. And that just drains my monthly cash flow. So I think there's a balance, right? And so, when I started out, I using my budget or spending plan, created a savings rate, which at that point was around like 40 or 50%. And then my wife and I said, okay, we're going to take a third of this money and use it to pay off debt. We're going to take a third of this money and invest it in the stock market via, 403B and Roth IRAs and that kind of thing. And then we're going to take a third of it to invest in real estate via cash flowing rental properties. So I think to ignore any of the ways to build wealth, which is to reduce liabilities, which is generally paying off debt, or to build assets, would be a mistake. I think you want to have a balanced plan.
So, Bonnie, you had mentioned that if you weren't to pay off debt, as quickly after school, but maybe not do the stock market, what would you suggest to a new graduate or person early in career, where to put that money in the beginning, and then would you just pay off the minimum, or do you say go into forbearance?
No, I don't think forbearance is a good idea. I mean, if you're in a, if you're eligible for public service loan forgiveness, then it makes sense to do that. But again, people don't stay at their jobs very long. People switch jobs pretty frequently. But obviously, if you are in an academic institution, it makes sense to do that. I guess I would have gotten PSLF if I stayed at my job. I don't know how many years longer. It wouldn't have been a whole lot of time, but I decided not to. And I know I keep going back to this. I'm a broken record, but what you want to invest in is really going to depend on how quickly you want the cash flow from an investment. So just to give you an example, if someone's like, I really love what I do, I can foresee doing this for a long time, maybe I'll go part-time at some point or whatever, maximizing your retirement accounts in the stock market, maybe starting a brokerage account, maybe doing some passive real estate would be sufficient. But if you're someone who really wants to do something, ASAP, less than 5 years, then you're going to have to do something else besides the stock market, right? Because the return's just not going to be fast enough or big enough. And so again, it just really depends on the urgency of whatever your goals are. But I would say in general, I also don't think people necessarily should max out their retirement accounts, because it really just depends. That just pays you much later. So I'm also a big fan of renting because mortgage a home ties up a lot of your income, a lot of your cash. And I also know it's kind of the American dream. I didn't really grow up in a house because my family wasn't that well off. So we lived in apartments. And so it never was personally a dream for me. Um, that's really a personal decision, whether you buy a home or not. I just prefer to have my money invested, and I haven't lived in the same place for a long time. Like I just moved last summer. So I think I think I have like commitment issues with buying a home. That's a whole nother story. So again, for a new grad, I think I would love to open their eyes to the possibility that they really can have and do what they want in medicine. There's so many ways to be a doctor and use your physician brain if they want to. And clinical medicine isn't the only way. And honestly, in this day and age, I think you really have to think outside the box and be entrepreneurial. Like things are just changing so rapidly. I mean, at the time of this recording, like even in a few months, there'll be something new, right?
So then to think about some other passive income as a means to grow it quicker than a stock market.
Yeah, they're going to have to if they want choices now, or maybe a lifestyle change, right? Like I have clients who, work clinically, and I hate the word side gig. It's more like diversifying your income stream, right? Because you never want to be, stuck with one income stream. Like even in my business, my business makes money in multiple ways. Some are more passive and some are not so passive.
Right. Having various streams of income. Jordan, you've talked about that with some beginning in some of the real estate investments that you started early on in your career. And how did you decide which ones to choose, and where you felt most comfortable versus something too high risk?
For the real estate properties
Yes.
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of I say we, my wife and I, did it together, and she's kind of the brains behind the operation now more so. But we basically, decided, we live in Buffalo, which is where I'm from. We wanted to invest in Buffalo near us because at least for the first one, we wanted to get our hands dirty. It was interesting when we first started. Buffalo was listed in trade publications as the worst city to invest in real estate. But we ended up just kind of trying to learn a lot. And we basically look at cash flow, which is a pretty popular metric that a lot of people use and espouse. So we basically would kind of analyze properties and their projected income against the projected expenses. And as long as the income was at least 10% or more of what we were projected to put into it money wise via down payment, closing costs and renovation costs, etc., that would be something we would move forward on. And so we're now up to 9 properties like that, and it has cash flows for us about $10,000 to $11,000 a month. So that's cash that comes into us above the mortgage and expenses and things like that. So it's a real game changer. And interesting enough, Buffalo last year was listed as the number one market to invest in real estate in. So it just shows how fickle those things can be. And so I think it's less necessarily about the market and just kind of about being patient and looking for the right deals and things like that.
So, Bonnie, that's kind of what you mean. If you had a secondary income that would grow faster than stock market, that you might use that for your student loan repayment versus right away and then anticipate paying off the loans and then building your wealth.
I mean, I think that's ideal. It's just that most new physicians just don't have this education, right? They just don't know.
Right. And they're scared. They only know one way: graduate,
Exactly.
pay off your loans, get a job, get a house, um, get a wife, and have kids.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about renting, and I know Jordan and other media outlets. You've talked about buying, and talking about a doctor's home. Um, what do you think between those two? Both of you have children and significant others, but share a little bit about Jordan, when you were talking about buying a home, and what size home, and did you feel compelled to buy a home for other people to look at, or do you feel like you could stay within your means to buy only what you needed?
We didn't necessarily. I would say, there was definitely a time where I felt um, beholden to like the image of a doctor, especially like plastic surgeon or dermatologist like Bonnie, where you think you have to look a certain way. But after kind of going through what I went through at the end of my training, kind of overcame that and became much more focused just on, what I wanted life to look like and what was important to me. Um, in terms of the house, my general recommendation for people just starting out is like Bonnie, to to rent. And basically, the reason being that when you start out, most people will leave their jobs within the first 5 years. And you don't necessarily know what home values are going to do in that period. And you don't want to be in the middle of figuring out a job situation and trying to sell a house that can't sell and things like that. Um, that being said, I bought a house. And basically, what my wife and I did was we sat down. We knew we were moving to where I was from. My wife's not from here, but we knew we were planning to be in this region for a long time. That's no guarantee. But we felt that we would be here for a long time, number one. But number two, we said, okay, we're going to figure out exactly what we're looking for in a house. And if we find it, then we'll try to buy that house. If we don't, then we're just going to rent. And so we sat and basically with our, budgeting said, okay, how much can we or are we willing to pay on a mortgage while still reaching our financial goals? And then like, what exactly do we want in a house? So before that, when I was in New York City, we lived in a very small apartment. We had two kids that slept in the bedroom, and my wife and I slept on an air mattress in the living room area. So it was really important to us to find a house. We said we want at least 4 bedrooms. We want a yard that's fenced in outside. We had a dog too. We want the dog to be able to run outside. We want X, Y, and Z. And we were just very methodical about going through and looking and saying, if we find this, we will take it. If not, we're just going to rent. We ended up finding it. And so it just kind of worked out that way. But we would have been, very happy to rent had we not. So that's kind of how we looked at it. I think certainly, different situations, if someone's like moving across the country for the first time, it makes sense to rent especially. But I think in certain situations, if you kind of set criteria and stick to them, that it can make sense to buy. But that's another big liability that you're adding on. So again, you want to make sure that it fits within your financial plan, that you can reach your financial goals with that payment every month. You don't want that to become a hindrance or sort of the proverbial golden handcuffs.
So, Bonnie, what Jordan had talked about is we're going to have a home, and obviously we need four bedrooms and a yard. And I wonder if you encounter people that don't appreciate, when they factor in that budget to buy the house, that kind of what Jordan alluded to as kind of lifestyle creep, that once I have the house, then I have the lawn keeping, and then the rest of the neighborhood has to have holiday lights and it pays this much, and then my neighbors have these cars, and I have this car. Do you find, or what do you advise people or talk to people about when they discuss buying a home or renting in an area, and how that might affect your lifestyle and other financial pieces that go into that decision?
Yeah, I mean, buying a home is it really is a personal decision. It's an emotional purchase, right? It's not an investment while you're living in it. And I don't think people appreciate the extra expenses, right? It's not just a mortgage and the taxes. Things break. So case in point, I just moved to Tampa last summer and I had the 2 hurricane welcome party, Hurricane Milton and
Nice.
Hurricane Helene. And I'll tell you, I am so grateful that I rent. We happened to choose an area that was a good area to be in hurricane wise. If you ever moved to Tampa, Jordan, know your flood zone and your evacuation zone. Things I did not even look at. And, if something happened, like if the roof got damaged, it's not my problem. I've just had too many friends, like doctor friends who have big houses, one of them actually had to spend $200,000 on a retaining wall recently. So personally, it's not that important to me, but that's just me, right? So in terms of my clients, like it's interesting. Like it's actually not a topic that comes up a lot, in terms of like a home purchase or even a car purchase, but it's I'm not even sure I could really give a blanket answer, but I would advise them, just like what I said, the hitting cost of home ownership. Everything, something happens, you have to pay for it. Whereas I rent, something happens, depending if I broke it or not, right? But the dishwasher broke, recently, and that wasn't my expense; it was their expense.
It's a
The
gift.
toilets,
Yeah,
what?
it's a gift to have both of you on because you share such different views, and it's something for everybody in the audience to take away with. I mean, it's
Yeah,
extraordinary.
and I've moved a lot, so and I love to travel, and so right now this fits my lifestyle, and I thought I was going to be in the Northeast forever, but clearly not, because now I'm in Tampa. So it is not in my even short-term financial plan to buy. Again, especially with the hurricanes, it's like, why would I want to buy? So many physicians lost their homes here, and they have to rebuild, and insurance never gives you everything you need to rebuild your home. And I heard the insurance rates are astronomical, and a lot of companies have pulled out of Florida because it's just, you know, they're losing money. So again, it's truly a personal preference. I mean, of course, like there are days where I'm like, I would love a home with a pool because everyone here has a pool, and then I'm like, oh, all that maintenance, and I wouldn't do it. I'd pay for someone, but like, it's just not a you know what and
It's not a
it's not,
priority.
ultimately, it's not a priority for me.
Yeah.
I think that hits on it really quick. Like, exactly. It's just about prioritizing. And like, I talk a lot about intentional spending, or just spending on money that's actually going to be very purposeful for you. So like, if a house is what does that for you, then that makes sense. If not, renting can make a lot of sense. And the example I always give is like, we bought this house, which still to this day is our biggest monthly expense, but it brings us an even greater amount of joy. But on the flip side, like for a car, I ended up, I'm not a big car person, so I ended up just buying like a used Toyota, like kind of a rundown car. So it's just about kind of aligning your money with your priorities, which brings it back to what Bonnie was saying in the beginning. And I think that's a really important thing, especially when you're starting out, because it can be easy to try to like keep up with the Joneses and that kind of thing. And that's not saying don't buy anything nice, but it's saying if you're gonna spend money, make sure it's because it makes you happy, not because you're worrying about other people's perceived opinion of you.
I that really resonates, and it's almost as if there's a part of you that has to decide independently, and you've both done that beautifully, is to appreciate what's important to you and why you're spending the money on what you're spending it on, whether because it is purposeful, it's an ends to a means to where you want to be. But I think there's a component of each of us that has to go through that transition to appreciate, why am I spending this money on this? And it can't be because I'm tired, because I'm overworked. I've earned it. I deserve it. Somebody else, next to me, I appreciate what they have, and I want that. But you've both said repeatedly, and I think it's such a focus to know what your values are and spend toward what creates what is part of your value and what you find purpose for.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm. We don't have too much time left, but you both educated yourself to become financially independent and grow your own wealth. What are your thoughts on a financial advisor? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience that say, that's too hard for me. It's overwhelming. I'm so busy with my day job. I don't have time for this. Jordan, what would you? And I know you have courses on this, and Bonnie, you have courses as well. So. Um, Give us your take on financial advisor. Do you need it or not?
Oh, I was just going to say, I will tell you, in, not like I've been doing this, forever, but there's only one financial advising firm that I recommend now, and they think really outside of the box. I am not anti-financial advisor. I just have found that they're kind of cookie cutter, and they only really know the stock market, and the stock market has the lowest returns in terms of investments. So, and again, I think in this day and age, to rely on just one type of investing, the stock market is just really, I think it's frankly dangerous. So, this one financial advising firm, again, they're I love their philosophy. Everything they do, it really jives with how I think about money. And the thing is, hiring a financial advisor is fantastic. I'm all about having people on your support team, right? Like I don't do my own books for my business. I don't do my own taxes. I have a team for that. But you still have to know money. Like no one's going to care about it more than you. And, having a financial advisor is great and you still have to know what's going on. I mean, Jordan, I'm sure you have so many clients where just one, if they're married or, in a relationship, only one person knows about money and the other person kind of turns a blind eye and, the divorce rate isn't zero. And then suddenly, one spouse is like, holy crap, I don't know. I didn't even know where the money is or going. And
Yeah,
so I just
definitely.
think it's such an important, it's like a critical life skill. So there's so many ways to learn it. Again, you mentioned Jordan and I both have, courses. We're not the only people that teach money. And I think I think it's really great for couples who may not agree on things financially because it's nice to have that third party. So those are my thoughts on financial advisors.
Yeah, mine echo pretty similar. The way I think of financial advisors is like the same way I think about landscapers, and I don't mean that in like a pejorative way. But like I know how to cut my lawn or like trim the trees and stuff like that. I just know that if it was up to me, I wouldn't do it, and so I hire a landscaper to do it. But I know what good work is and what isn't, and what good prices are, and if I'm getting taken advantage of. And so it's the same thing for a financial advisor. I tell people you can definitely do it on your own. um, you don't necessarily need an advisor, but if you're going to use one, you need to be absolutely sure that number one, you understand how they're getting paid and you're paying them, fairly and not overpaying. And number two, that you understand how your money is being invested. And so that means you still have to educate yourself. You still need to know exactly what they're doing with your money. Or else that's a dangerous situation that I see people in a lot of times.
I love that you said that because it can't be I'm hiring this person and I'm going to put my head in the sand and defer all of the decisions to them. It's really an ownership piece to it, is what I'm hearing
Yes.
for both of you, that you have to know how much you're paying them, what you're getting back from them, and what could I do on my own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to be, appropriate to your time and the time that we have. I want to give you just each a last minute, a few minutes to maybe recap the most important points that you would take away from your growth in the last 5 years and what you would share with others.
I think, it really, there's money advice. I mean, it really comes down to it's important to have multiple streams of income, having income producing assets, right? That's, if I had to distill it into one sort of sentence, that would be it. But then also, I want to remind everyone listening is that you really can do and have the life that you want. I think a lot of us just kind of like, we kind of think inside the box because that's sort of what we're told in society. And having lived the life that I've been living the last 5 years, like, truly, I believe my life is magical. Like, I get to do what I want. I get to help people the way that I want to. I get to travel. I get to travel to speak and go to different countries. And that's the life that I like. And this is a life I wouldn't have dreamed of 5 or 6 years ago. And so I think it's really important to surround yourself with people who have a growth mindset and truly are committed to living an extraordinary life, because my clients, like, one of the best things is for me to see them realize that so much more is available to them. And this is going to look different for every person, but I just think with physicians it's so easy to think like my life has to be a certain way. And with how medicine is changing, I think it's really just so important for them to know that there's so many options for them.
Jordan, you built yourself out of burnout. And what would you share with others that would help the next person to avoid the debt that you've had and to build their power of financial freedom?
I think it's a similar, vein of mindset in that, we're as physicians, we're so, in some respects, we're so successful and so educated and so confident. And in others, it's like we can, because we're not necessarily educated or have as much exposure, we kind of doubt ourselves. But as a physician, like you can, like Bonnie was saying, you can do and make whatever you want out of this. There's so many examples. You can look at, me, like I'm still a full-time academic plastic surgeon, love what I do. I don't have any plans to stop anytime soon. But in creating these other, streams of income, et cetera, I've given myself a level of comfort and flexibility and stuff. And just the ability to live and practice exactly the way I want. Even though I'm employed, I practice exactly the way I want because I know, if something happened, I would be able to survive without it. Again, for me, that's how I've built this life that I never anticipated I could. So you can do this. I think to kind of put a bow on it, like finances is not that difficult. Any physician is more than capable of figuring out their finances and reaching financial freedom via any of the paths that are available. And there are many paths available.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jordan Frey, Dr. Bonnie Koo, for sharing your experience and ideas and advice for each person's personal financial security and empowerment. It has been a pleasure to be with you the last hour. You've been excellent. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for
Thanks so
having me.
much.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Limitless Leaders podcast series brought to you by ASPS, the Aesthetic Society, and the American Hernia Society with the generous support of Allergan Aesthetics. We hope you enjoyed our conversation today and gained valuable insights and inspirations from our guests. Check out our other episodes on your favorite podcast platform or download them directly from ASPS EdNet. Stay tuned for new seasons and exciting episodes where we continue celebrating and empowering women leaders in our field.